You Matter podcast, YMP, episode 2, The Sounds of Ethiopia, Emahoi Tsegwe Mariam Gwebru and Mulatu Astatke, produced by Tare. What happens when a nun's piano prayers meet the hypnotic grooves of Ethio-jazz? Ethiopia speaks in silence and rhythm, and the world listens. Welcome to the You Matter podcast, YMP. I'm your host. Today we explore the soul of Ethiopian music. Music has always been central to Ethiopia, woven into prayer, dance, resistance, and celebration. From liturgical chants of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to the jazz clubs of Addis Ababa, music carries Ethiopia's memory. Our focus is on two remarkable figures, Emahoi Tsegwe Mariam Gwebru, the nun pianist who turned solitude into sound, and Mulatu Astatke, the visionary who created Ethio-jazz and made Ethiopia groove on the world stage. Two artists, two worlds, one contemplative, one experimental. Together they shaped Ethiopia's musical identity in the 20th and 21st centuries. With me are members of the YMP team, Nuri and Mike. Together we'll journey through their lives, their philosophies, and their legacies. Let's begin with Emahoi. Nuri, take us into her story.
Emahoi Tsegwe Mariam was born in 1923 in Addis Ababa into an aristocratic family. At 6, she was sent to Switzerland. There, she studied violin and piano at a boarding school in Lausanne. Imagine, a young Ethiopian girl in the 1930s Europe playing Bach and Mozart with precision. When she returned home, her life was interrupted by war. During the Italian occupation of Ethiopia, she and her family were placed under house arrest. Those years marked her deeply. Later, she studied in Cairo with Polish violinist Alexander Kontorowicz, who recognized her exceptional talent. She seemed destined for an international career. But destiny shifted. At 21, she gave up the concert halls and entered a monastery in Wello, taking the name Tsegwe Mariam. She lived as a nun for decades, dedicating herself to prayer and composition.
So music became her form of prayer?
Yes, she said, to play music is to pray. Her works reflect that. Pieces like The Homeless Wanderer or Ballad of the Spirits are meditations in sound. They use Ethiopian pentatonic modes, but structured with European classical forms. Critics compared her to Chopin or Satie, but her music is uniquely Ethiopian, deeply spiritual, melancholic, contemplative.
Did her music reach the world during her lifetime?
For decades, she was little known outside Ethiopia. Only in 2006, when Buddha Musik's Ethiopics series released her recordings, did she gain international recognition. Suddenly, listeners from Paris to New York heard the quiet genius of a nun in Addis Ababa. She became a global cult figure late in life.
So Emahoi gave us the inward voice of Ethiopia, the sound of solitude. Now we turn from the monastery to the nightclub, from silence to rhythm. Mike, tell us about Mulatu Astatke.
Mulatu was born in 1943 in Jimma. His family sent him abroad for education, first to London, then to New York. He studied at Berklee College of Music in Boston, the first African student to do so. In the 1960s, jazz, Latin rhythms, and funk were exploding globally. Mulatu absorbed these influences, but always looked back to Ethiopia's modes and scales. His philosophy was fusion. He believed Ethiopian identity could meet jazz improvisation, Afro-Cuban percussion, and Western orchestration. Out of that came Ethio-jazz.
What does Ethio-jazz sound like?
It's hypnotic, a vibraphone riff playing Ethiopian pentatonic scales, horns echoing jazz arrangements, congas and drums adding African Latin grooves, then that haunting Ethiopian feel, tazeta, the nostalgia mode. In the 1960s and 70s, Addis Ababa was alive with music. The city had nightclubs, orchestras, and a cosmopolitan scene. Mulatu thrived there. His albums Mulatu of Ethiopia and tracks like Yekermo So became the soundtrack of that golden era.
And he carried this sound beyond Ethiopia.
Yes. He collaborated with Duke Ellington, toured globally, and decades later, his music was rediscovered in Jim Jarmusch's film Broken Flowers. Suddenly, Ethio-jazz was on playlists worldwide. So Mulatu gave us the outward voice of Ethiopia, the sound of rhythm and experimentation.
But both Emahoy and Mulatu lived through Ethiopia's changing history. Mike, tell us about the wider context. The 1960s and 70s were Ethiopia's golden era of music. State orchestras like the Police Band and the Imperial Bodyguard Band nurtured talent. Record labels like Amhar Records released iconic 45s. Addis clubs pulsed with music that mixed tradition with funk and soul. But the 1974 revolution brought the Derg to power. Music faced censorship. Nightclubs closed. Many musicians fled. Mulatu left Ethiopia for years. Emahoy, already a nun, retreated further into spiritual solitude. The silence of the Derg years contrasted sharply with the vibrant Addis soundscape of a decade earlier. So Ethiopia's music was both suppressed and preserved?
Exactly. Suppressed in public, but preserved in memory and recordings. When the Ethiopic series began in the 1990s, it revived those lost sounds for new generations worldwide.
Emahoy and Mulatu, two lives, two paths.
Emahoy represents inward reflection. She played alone for God and soul. Her music carries silence as much as sound.
Mulatu represents outward experimentation. He played for clubs, orchestras, festivals. His music carries movement, rhythm, community.
But both are unmistakably Ethiopian.
Yes. Whether in a monastery cell or a jazz club, the Ethiopian modes, rhythms, and feeling of tazeta, nostalgia, longing, are always present. That's the thread connecting them.
Let's reflect. What do these two figures teach us about Ethiopia's place in global music?
That Ethiopia can innovate in silence. A nun's piano, unknown for decades, becomes a global treasure.
That Ethiopia can innovate in sound. A jazz man's fusion becomes a global genre.
Together, they show Ethiopia's dual legacy, the contemplative soul and the experimental rhythm, the individual voice and the collective groove.
Emahoy and Mulatu, two sides of Ethiopia's music. Both remind us music matters because it carries identity, memory, and possibility. We've looked at Emahoy's solitude and Mulatu's rhythm. But what about today? How do younger artists in the diaspora carry forward Ethiopia's sound? Mike, take us there.
Today's Ethiopian music is diverse. In Addis Ababa, Ethio-jazz clubs still play Mulatu's style. Bands like Alamayehu Eshete and the Walias Band in the 1970s laid foundations, and younger groups such as Debo Band in Boston or Invisible System in the UK continue the tradition abroad. Meanwhile, pianists and composers draw inspiration from Emahoy. Her sheet music, long hidden, is now studied by classical musicians worldwide. Young Ethiopian pianists play her works in concerts, honoring her spiritual style.
So her music moved from monastery silence into concert halls.
Yes. For decades, she played mostly for herself. Now, after her passing in 2023, her compositions are celebrated globally. They resonate with listeners who find in her music a quiet protest against despair and a prayer for resilience. On the other hand, Mulatu continues to tour and inspire. His collaborations with Western bands like the Heliocentrics introduced Ethio-jazz to new audiences. Younger Ethiopian musicians mix his sound with hip-hop, reggae, and electronic music. Artists like Gili Yalo, an Ethiopian-Israeli singer, fuse funk and traditional Ethiopian sounds. Ndigwena Mulu, known as Ethiopian Records, blends electronic beats with traditional rhythms, carrying Ethio-jazz into the digital age.
So the legacy is alive, not frozen in the past.
Exactly. From Emahoy's sheet music to Mulatu's live shows, Ethiopia's music is global now. It travels in the diaspora, speaks in new genres, and yet always carries that Ethiopian essence, the pentatonic scale, the haunting tezeta, the rhythms of resilience.
It's a reminder that Ethiopia's music is not only history, it's living, evolving, moving from Addis to Boston, from monasteries to Spotify playlists. So what have we heard today? From Emahoy, the prayer of a piano, solitude turned into universal sound. From Mulatu, the rhythm of Ethio-jazz, Ethiopia dancing with the world. From today's musicians, the legacy reimagined in new forms, new geographies. Together they remind us that Ethiopian music is not bound by time. It is past, present, and future. It is prayer and party, silence, and rhythm. Thank you for joining us on You Matter podcast, produced by Tear and presented by YMP team. Until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and keep believing in the value of your voice.